Welcome everyone to the Starting Points Education Series. I am Loretta Depka and we are here with Anna Marie Hrivnak to talk about isolation and, more importantly, some coping skills that go along with it. You can feel free to add questions to the chat, and if we're have some time, we'll make sure that we get to those questions. After the podcast, you'll be able to find this on the Starting Point Inc. of New Jersey education channel. Okay, so let's start with introducing Anna Marie. In your practice, you focus on the integration of body, mind, and spirit. You work with individuals in private as well as in group sessions to foster a foundation for peace and tranquility to the mind, strengthen the physical body, along with hope and courage to the wounded spirit. I love that introduction, Anna Marie, because all of us at this time are there. We need that. We need that wounded spirit lightened.
Yes.
So the interesting, what I find so interesting is this topic, because you are experienced on both sides of the table, basically. You are a practitioner that practices and helps people with isolation, but you were actually isolated before the rest of us. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I can share some of that, Loretta. Back in 2019, November of 2019, I found out that I was having some type of a change in my body. And I found that I was losing energy. And when I say energy, I was very lethargic and just wasn't quite myself. So I ended up going to rheumatologists, people along that line, and pulmonologists. And in January of 2020, I was given a framework. They did not know what was happening to me, but they could see that I was having a lot of changes to my body. I lost, in a 3-month period, I lost 50 pounds. And along with that, yeah, it was, and they diagnosed, it was surprising. Yeah, it was surprising. It was as if my body was kidnapped. That's really the best way for me to say it. So they definitely could give me the diagnosis that I had what appeared to be double pneumonia. And I was short of breath. I was, my heart rate would go up, but this was in January of 2020, and COVID was not a thing as it been. So what they basically told me to do is they said to me, something is aggressively attacking your body and we need to be as aggressive. So they put me on a very strong medication because there were other indicators, which I won't go into all of that right now, but they said to me, go home and stay inside for the next 4 months. And they said, within 4 months, we'll start to look at your lungs again and see exactly what's going on. Because if in fact it were double pneumonia, they said in 4 months it should clear. So I did. I came home and my whole life turned upside down. I was really shaken to think that I had to stay in the house for 4 months and not go out. And when I came home, like I said, my whole world had turned upside down. By then, I had had several treatments of very intense medication. I had been hospitalized between November and January. And so my body was really reeling from a lot of things. So I wasn't quite my normal self. And I really was so sick that I didn't understand what was happening. And so the idea of being isolated, physically isolated from other people, was very challenging for me because I'm a people person.
Oh, Anna Marie, you know, I just can't imagine that news when I know what your energy level is like and how you enjoy people and enjoy socialization that all disappeared for you earlier than the rest of us.
Yes. And so it was a big thing to come home and try to deal with being isolated. And there's such a difference that I can see now, I didn't quite understand at that particular time, between being physically isolated from people and dealing with the emotional sense of isolation. And they're two different things.
Well, why don't we talk about those? Why don't you start with the emotional?
Well, the fact of thinking that you need to be away from other people, that you can't touch them, that they can't come close to you, and again, all of that was happening in my life in January, was, and you don't quite understand why, and even if you do understand why, the emotion of missing physical contact starts to roll inside you, and knowing that you can't reach out and hug starts to make your whole entire internal being, you get scared. I mean, that's basically what it is. You get scared, you get frightened. And I never realized how much we are people who need physical touch. Just touching someone's arm, touching someone's hand, hugging someone, just being close to them, bumping into somebody with your shoulder. It takes, our bodies need to be interacted with. And that isolation of emotion, that's the physical. The emotional component of dealing with the physical was very, very hard. But what started me to what I started to ponder was this. I started to think about other people who had been isolated. And this was just my first experience with it. And so when I started to think of people who back in the day needed to be in the iron lung, back in the
Oh,
day for
remember
polio.
those?
And things
Absolutely.
like, so I started to think about people like that. I started to think of people who do live alone. So
Right.
after, it was probably a month that it took me to settle down enough to start to think about others who were isolated. And again, people who don't have children, and find themselves in, just an apartment and don't have anyone to come and visit them and things like that. And so I started to think about the emotional components of what is entailed in that. And it was very early on, my ability to start thinking about other people being isolated. I started to think, well, how can I help them? Because I knew how afraid I was of being totally isolated in this house by myself. And, it gets very cavernous.
That's a
Sound
great
changes.
word.
Yeah, it does. Sound changes when you're isolated. And that was one of the most profound emotional issues that I started to deal with. Just quiet at the level that it is quiet when you are totally alone. Like I said, everything becomes cavernous, and just dealing with that. And so it moves you to another, well, it moved me to another place within myself of paying attention to, I could hear my own heartbeat. I mean, it was fascinating. I can say that fascinating now. When I was going through it, it was frightening. It was really frightening.
So then did you use meditation? Hearing your heartbeat, I always think of meditation as.
That is exactly what I did, Loretta. Yes.
Okay.
I started to think, all right, if this is happening, then I'll use it as best I can. And so I did. I would close my eyes, I would listen to my heartbeat. And then also, since it was so very quiet, I was acutely aware of my breath. And, when you do meditation, they say, listen to the quietness of your breath. Well, I had to, because there weren't any other sounds around. So I did. I started to move into meditation, and it was so very calming. So very, very calming.
And you still have your great sense of humor. It sounds like you used that. You pulled on that as well.
Well, I had to. I really had to, because things were so very serious. What basically happened is we knew I was very, very sick. We knew that what the doctors had said is there is something aggressively attacking your body, and we have to be as aggressive. And knowing that, I had to just step back and say, all right, I have to live in the unknown, and in the unknown are limitless possibilities. And I thought that was going to be my strategy. In the unknown, there were limitless possibilities for me to choose from. And so I was either going to have to choose one that was, I could sit and worry about the unknown because they really couldn't tell me what was happening, or I was going to sit there and say, you know what? If I have a chance to pick what I want, this is what I'll pick. And so I picked a more positive outcome. And so I just thought, I'm going to just meditate and pray and reach out to other people. It's funny, I can remember the one day my son and I, Court, were driving over to the University of Penn. I had an appointment. And I started to cry. And the reason was, I said to Court, you know, I'm going to have to give up my office at Starting Point. And I said, you know, based on what they're saying, I won't be able to go back we didn't think I'd ever go back. And Court said, well, Mom, don't give up yet. But at that particular day, I just thought it would never be a reality again. And I remember we came home that afternoon after seeing the doctors, and everything was still somewhat dire. And I came in and I sat down and I did exactly what I just said to you a minute ago. I knew there were limitless possibilities in the unknown. And so I said to myself, you know what? Maybe people will be open enough for me to talk to them on the phone or FaceTime. Okay, and so that's what I started to focus on. And little did I know that 3 months later, the entire world was going to close down. And it did close on March 16th, which happens to be my birthday. But what happened was this. People were more than willing to connect on the phone, on FaceTime, and Zoom became acceptable. I mean, back in January, it was not even a concept that clients would meet you on this type of a format and actually be able to connect and, you know, continue in the healing that you were doing with them and things along that line. And little did I know that 3 months later, the whole world, although it closed down, it also opened up for me. And I found that to be unbelievably such a gift. And so I had practiced a number of different things during the time from January until March. And that was a lot of focusing on gratitude. So that was one of the other little components that I used. I was acutely aware that I needed to focus on what was working versus on what wasn't. And years ago, I had read a book by Wayne Dyer, and he said, don't focus on the lack. So I remembered that, and that's what I did. I started to focus on everything that I had once had. And so that's one of the things I did, is I went through my mind and just remembered everything that I had had, because there were a lot of things that were taken away from me that January. Like I said, I always had tons of energy, tons, and I had none. And Norman Cousins, even a longer period ago, I think it was back in the 70s or 80s when Norman Cousins had written his book, he talked about memory in our bodies and a sense of humor. So I picked up those two things. And I thought, all right, I'm going to remember. And remembering is also something that Eckhart Tolle talks about in his books, about we actually have cellular memory. So I thought, all right, with gratitude and with a sense of humor, I'm going to go back and remember things that I am grateful for, which I knew would then flood my system with not only gratitude, which is the highest way of our being able to help self-heal, but as I say, it just, as Norman Cousins says, to be able to laugh. He had done many, many studies on the effect of laughter on helping to heal people. So I would sit and laugh about memories of things that were funny that I had done or that other people had done. And so that, along with meditation and prayer, became my everyday practice of finding a footing. And to also, like everything, I didn't have control over what was happening to my body. And I won't go into the details, but I mean, my body was very foreign to me because an autoimmune disease had come in, and there were multiple changes in my physical body that I could see on an everyday basis. So that was unfamiliar. So what I did again is I went back to the familiar, and I remembered things that had happened and why I was grateful for them. And so that whole sense of gratitude really helped. Gratitude, a sense of humor. So that's basically what I started.
This is just a crazy question here, but as we come out of isolation, we are all feeling the potential for freedom with the vaccine that's happening. And but are people also struggling with a little bit of sadness because isolation also allowed them to be with themselves and in some cases with their loved ones? Are you seeing that trend?
Very much so. I've certainly, and in fact, it's funny, I had a conversation with someone this morning just about that. And she basically said to me that she didn't realize that at the beginning of isolation, being isolated, she was at one point, and she said she has completely morphed since that time because she was actually able, and in fact, it's an article that I would love to be able to connect to our website about the 10 different gifts that we get from isolation. And I will certainly send that over. But some of the gifts are slowing down. And when we slow down, we have time to sleep and start to plan our lives in a different way. Certainly at the beginning of isolation, the creativity of people that was sparked was unbelievable because people started to cook. They had time to cook and cook elaborately. So if we all remember going on social media and Facebook, and I mean, just all of those things, there were recipes going back and forth, and people were calling each other and saying, why don't you try this and this? So it opened us all to a different part of ourselves. And having that time, I think people are going to miss it. However, I don't think we will ever go back to that hectic pace, that frantic pace that we were in 2019, well, at the beginning of 2020 or 2020. I don't think we'll ever go back to that again, ever. I've talked to too many men also who have found that they found their families. They found the joy of that.
Right. The ability to work at home has changed everything. So life is we're not going back to where we were.
We will not go back. We'll go back to the fun times, but we won't go back to that. I don't think we'll go back to that hectic pace again. I don't think anybody wants it, and I don't think anyone realized that we had gotten to that crescendo of activity within ourselves. I think this is a huge gift, this slowing down. And I think a lot of us will stay in connection with that.
I heard you when you were talking about isolation, and I believe we're isolated at different times in our life. Is there, I heard you talk about sort of a schedule. Is there a framework to help us and a purpose during isolation that, I look at you, I see how many activities and projects you're working on. You fed your creativity. So what is sort of the framework that you use mentally to get there, and then the skills that you use to do so many different things?
Well, you know what? I think it is a whole process. And I liken, for the journey that I took, I liken isolation as sort of somewhat like a grieving process. I think when we all knew back in March 16th of last year, when it was demanded, you needed to stay inside. I think there was a lot of denial. Why do we have to do this? No. And then came anger. So I think really the world, all of us went through that grieving process. Each one of the steps so I think that was the beginning framework. And I think we all went through those steps in different ways. the way it impacted our own lives. And again, like denial and anger and bargaining, all of those things, just the beginning steps of the grieving process. But in that, and as we all know in the grieving process, sometimes you can get stuck on one stage, and sometimes sometimes you get stuck, and then other times you can go 4 or 5 steps ahead, and then all of a sudden one day you find yourself back at step 1.
Right.
So I think a lot of us went through that, and I certainly can say that I know that was part of my process. And it was surprising. It was really surprising. I would say for myself, one of the biggest surprises for me is I have always been positive, and I found myself not being able to.
I'm sorry, I just can't imagine that with you.
Yeah, well, it was there, full force. And it was so foreign to me to not have the positive spin that I was and the thing that was interesting is I couldn't feel it. I am a feeling person. And so I could not feel the ability to stay in that positive frame. And I probably sat in that for, I would say probably 2 weeks when I finally stopped and I sat up and I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to do the same thing that I'm doing with my memory and being grateful. And I'm going to be grateful for experiencing this, experiencing the lack of feeling positive and learn from it. And when I made that my ally rather than my enemy, I can't begin to tell you the number of things that I began to understand about people that I had met in my life who were not positive. And the compassion and the sense of understanding that came about from that is something that, I can feel myself getting teary, is something that I will always, always be grateful for. It just taught me so much. It really did. And it just taught me a whole lot of things. Yeah. So, but then I realized that you need to, as best you can, fan the embers of your choosing to be, to get that feeling back. And so I started to do a meditation, and this I can also send to the website. It's called Heart and Brain Coherence. And it is a meditation where you actually take time to, and it's a rewiring. I mean, and it is not woo-woo, it is scientifically based, that when we take time to allow our minds to connect with the heart of gratitude, of caring, of compassion, we actually align the brain and the heart together, and it starts to facilitate a lot of different feelings. And that was also another strategy, practice. It wasn't even a strategy, it was a practice that I embraced. And that was, again, very, very life-giving. It was gradual, but it did come back. And then again, one day, all of a sudden, I could start to feel again. And the positivity started to come back a little bit. But quite candidly, I think the positivity came back in starting to be creative. I mean, that was the vehicle that I started to use. I would go out into the backyard, which was the only place I was allowed to go. And I had been very fortunate that 2 years before I had had a pond put in. And so I would go out and look at the fish and talk to them.
Did they answer?
They didn't. But I swore they knew who I was.
There you go.
I did. They saw me. And so that was, I went out and started to look at them in March. And then when, Easter came, I called a fish store and I asked a gentleman there if he would pick out 3 koi. I did not have koi. I had only had goldfish in the pond. And so I asked him if he would pick out 3 very distinctively different koi so I could give them to my grandchildren that I was not seeing and were not coming, and put them in the pond, and that was going to be their Easter present. So when, he got them for me, and I had someone drive up for me, and they drove to the front of the store, because by the time in April, we were already quarantined. But they did curbside, and I put the fish or the koi in the pond and took pictures of them, and I sent them to my grandchildren for Easter, and I said, someday you'll be able to come and see them. And you should see how big they are now. They're huge. They're
Oh.
really getting there. But looking at them too, again, was a healing thing for me. So connecting to things that were living, and so I started a whole process again of the isolation. I would never have been in my backyard as often as I was during isolation. And my yard offered me things that I didn't even know were out there.
Wow.
Just to watch the cycle of a plant over a number of months and how that changed. And so it just took on a whole different world. It did. And there were many of us that did that. I mean, tons of people started planning and things like that. So I think moving into a creative or connected endeavor when we're in isolation is important. And it can be connection with whatever makes you feel good. It can be food, it can be goldfish.
There you go.
Yeah, plants, watching the clouds, watching clouds is fascinating because they change constantly. So I spent, a couple of weeks doing that, watching clouds and how they change within minutes. Mm-hmm. So they were some of the things.
So when others fell into isolation and we're not doing well with it, what was and I think some of us even today are still stuck in those patterns. What would be the best advice you could give people moving forward?
I think being gentle with yourself. I really think that's the biggest thing. To be gentle with yourself and know that the annoyance, the rejection is really just part of the grieving process. That's really what I believe. And so give ourselves time to grieve and say, I don't want to be here, or the isolation means this, or this to me. And be gentle with yourself as you go through that. And then when you are ready, turn around and start to move towards how to rejuvenate yourself. The idea of, resilience and what resilience has been throughout history, and start to pay attention to that. And that's, again, something that, I started to do. I started to look at how were people resilient in times of isolation throughout history. I mean, we're not the first group of people that were, it was worldwide. That's really very true. First time and most especially since we had social media, I believe we all felt so connected in this isolation. But there were phenomenal things on Facebook. There was one thing, view from my window, or something along that line, where people were posting views from the inside of their house, outside in their yards and stuff. And that was very life-giving. So I think just learning to be resilient and to rejuvenate yourself. Look at that, learn about adaptability. How do you adapt to things that are out of your control, and how can you control it? And when I don't care for the word control, to be very candid, so I never thought in that word. I would always say the word, what framework could I build? And the reason I say the word framework is, to me, a frame always outlines a beautiful picture on the inside. So for me, I say framework. Because I think, all right, I'm the one that's creating the picture that's inside this framework. And I can create something beautiful, or I can create something that will be agitating and aggravating. So I would choose the other. But again, to be gentle, because you know what? Some days we might pick up a darker color of paint to put inside that picture that we're drawing. And, that's part of it. We have to have the ups and we have to have the downs. And, not to go back too much to the illness that I had, but there were days when I felt wonderful, and there were days that I just thought I was slipping all the way back. And I had to learn to just deal with that. So candidly, I have not been out in the world since November of 2019.
So what are the first few things you will do when you can be back in the world, when I know all of us are thinking about that.
Well,
Because
you know what? I found a phenomenal quote. And so this quote I have hanging in my bedroom, and it is exactly what I focus on because I'm visualizing going in to see that pulmonary doctor at Penn, and she's saying, Anna Marie, you are good to go. And so
he is going to say that.
she is. Oh, I absolutely believe that. So this quote I found, and I have it hanging in my bedroom, and with your permission, I would love to send it to our website and
Absolutely.
maybe have people have the ability to, get it and be able to print it out for themselves.
Sure.
But what it says is this, it's a beautiful picture in the background, and it says, when you find yourself cocooned in isolation and cannot find your way out of the darkness, remember that this is similar to the place where caterpillars go to grow their wings.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, isn't that pretty? And so I believe with this isolation, I keep thinking to myself, well, I am inside that chrysalis, becoming that which I will be when I can go out into the outside world. And so for some of the people that I speak to, we talk about that, about getting back out into the world in a more normalized way than we are right now. And so embracing that isolation is offering us that place to grow wings in a way that we never had before. And that is emotionally, psychologically, all of those things. It's many, many, many components involved in that. But we will all reemerge different, much different, but a whole new version of ourselves.
And Anna Maria, I would like you to talk a little bit about, I believe your resilience program is still available on your
Yes,
website, is it not?
It is. It's Rejuvenate. That's the name
Oh, I'm
of the
sorry.
actual program. That's okay. The program is called Rejuvenate, but within the components of the Rejuvenate program, we go into what resilience is, how to foster resilience within ourselves, what resilience looks like. And after each of the episodes that we did, we also offered a resource package. And in the resource package, it gave TED Talks, gave movies, it gave articles, it gave poetry. I don't think there was much that we didn't touch upon that were extra resources for people. So again, it was about resilience and how to foster that. It talked a lot about ambiguous loss. And ambiguous loss, of course, is something that happens. We lose something, but at the same time, it's not really gone, but it's no longer touchable in your own life. It's gone, but it's not totally gone. And then adaptability, we certainly focused in on adaptability and what that means and how we can be adaptable and how people were adaptable throughout history. And then there was also a component of identifying our strengths. How do we identify our strengths and where to look for the strengths that you wanted to strengthen in your everyday life?
And also, you're doing a fantastic series. Currently, the first Tuesday of every month.
Yes, Court and I are doing, we're offering the first Tuesday of every month, we're offering a different component. Last month, we were certainly just, as I said, working together to have people help identify their strengths and vulnerabilities. And that's
available on our website, the Starting Point's website, as well as yours.
Yes, it is.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And the month before that, we focused in on the gift of change and just a lot of things along that line. So yes, different things are on the website. So people are very welcome to go and get those.
And that series is really based out of positive psychology, correct?
It is. Yes.
So
from
again,
the University of Pennsylvania, yes, we based it a lot on that. Yeah.
So you practice what you preach, Anna Marie.
I do. Like I said, I've learned to do that even more so. I mean, I always did have it, but it's funny when something challenges you to the level that I was challenged, and everything that is familiar to you is stripped away. It's a whole different thing to stop, to look at it, and to rebuild. But in that rebuilding, which the whole world has done, we've all done it. I mean, we've all done it. We will come out anew. We really will. And there are many, many things resources that we can look towards. So like I said, I'd be more than happy to share, a number of the things that were stepping stones for me. And I'd be thrilled to be able to share that with people.
We would love that. Well, Anna Marie, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, you are most welcome.
And everyone, thank you for joining us. And have a wonderful day. And hopefully we'll all be together physically soon.
There will be so many picnics this summer.
I can't wait.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.